And just so y'all know, I'm not a fraud. I'm not going to read that. You guys can read that. You can just pause the video and read that. Oh, let me try to focus this. Oh, my camera's still sideways. Oh, sorry. Oh. Okay. Just in case you wanted to read all this, just pause the video and just read it. Okay. Chapter 3, The Need for Love. Childhood was a mixture of good and bad times. I had fun as a kid, but mostly I was abused. What should have been a time of developing a positive outlook of expression was a period of cruelty. A lot of negative things occurred in my safe haven called home. I was called Daddy's and Mama's hard-headed child, the only one totally resistant to rules. I stood out as a bad seed of my family. I dared to do everything that supposedly shouldn't have been done. I didn't seek to understand the meaning of the word no. The DeBarge children as a whole were known for quick tempers and fighting. We thrived on folly. These characteristics were the means of survival and methods we used to divert the great measure of anxiety surrounding everyday life. The basic life learning that took place in my young years, including how I was supposed to love and treat other people, will later negatively influence all my major life decisions. The qualities I developed weren't appropriate, yet they became the data I drew upon. In such an environment as mine, unwholesome information was my daily bread. Strife was the air I breathed. Though I made it my main focus to enjoy boyhood each day, there was no space within my surroundings to truly develop into the real me. I had a good sense of humor. I used it to make people laugh as a shield against having to deal with reality. Laughter was universal, so everyone could join in. Tears, on the other hand, called for explanation. For the majority of my childhood, I felt like crying, but amused myself instead to cover up the situations that were causing me grief. Friends liked spending time with me and my brothers because we were a group of crazies. We always had something funny going on. We went overboard sometimes to the point of disregarding the feelings of those we teased. But hey, we were hurting, so whatever it took to feel better, we did and said. Nothing ever seemed too outrageous for a laugh. Usually I was the only one getting teased about my big head, the way I talked, or my lack of school smarts. Whatever opportunity presented itself to make someone else the brunt of the joke always felt good for a change. A neighborhood boy used to come to our house on a regular basis asking for food. We barely had enough food to feed all of us. I think he may have been somewhat retarded. Anyway, he wearied my brother Bobby with his repeated questions about what we maybe had that he could eat. Bobby met his request one day with a nauseating response. I was playing outside our home with Bobby, Bunny, and Randy when the boy walked over to us and asked, "What y'all got good to eat?" We mimicked him, knowing what he was going to say before he even said it. Bobby had already made up in his mind he was going to fix him so he wouldn't ask any more. "I'll get you a sandwich," Bobby responded. Bobby went into the house to make the boy his sandwich. He marched upstairs to the bathroom and he was very carefully used a spatula to scoop the remains of a bowel movement out of the toilet that had been left unflushed. Bobby then placed a blob of feces onto 2 pieces of bread and rushed back outside. He anxiously presented his creation to the boy, who unwillingly bit into it. "Ugh, boo-boo," he cried out. I immediately burst into laughter, along with the others, while the boy stood there dumbfounded. I mean, he was thoroughly disgusted. I laughed hysterically until it was difficult to catch my breath. I couldn't believe he'd bitten into a boo-boo sandwich or that Bobby had had the nerve to make it. Making that young man the brunt of the joke wasn't truly a funny thing to do. The family pain must have been gradually stripping away compassion even at that point. That was a terrible thing to do. I couldn't always wrap up in a cozy smile, though. I had a slight speech impediment as a child, which made it difficult to get certain phrases out. Family and friends laughed at me whenever I spoke of Daddy being a truck driver because my "the" sounded like a "fuh." When I was younger, I would use my mispronounced words to get attention and make people laugh. As I got older, however, I was embarrassed by my speech. Before I could get a serious point across, laughter would break out from those listening to me. I would laugh along, but it became another one of those things I really wanted to cry about. I craved attention as one of the middle children. I stood in line for recognition not only behind Daddy's and Mama's fighting, but behind Bobby as the firstborn son who cuddled up to Mama all the time, and Bobby, who was the only girl until Peaches came along 14 years later. Bunny and Bobby held landmark positions. I felt my place within the family was undefined. I sensed resentment from Daddy and Mama and often my brother and sister as if everyone was agitated by my existence. I grew up thinking no one really cared about me. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder wasn't a medical diagnosis during my childhood. I sure had it though. My behavior was constantly over the edge. My thoughts were scattered everywhere. The great lengths I went to for attention usually ended in trouble. I was always doing something outrageous to satisfy my need for anyone to place their thoughts on me. Bobby isolated himself from close relations while enduring the abuse in our home, but I, on the other hand, looked forward to receiving whatever bone someone would throw me. We were opposite, me and Bobby. He didn't trust anyone, and I was overly trusting of everyone. Mama told me repeatedly that I was too friendly, but was that a warning to stop? Even if it was, I didn't take heed. I needed that interaction with people. Each day brought new friendships with kids in the neighborhood, grown-ups at the corner store, or strangers walking down the street. I enjoyed talking with whoever could carry a conversation with me. My lack of discretion was unwise and would get me into plenty of predicaments. One day, a stranger befriended me while I played with my brothers at the park. My family and I were living on Mitchell Street in Detroit at the time. The man offered me candy and told me he knew my daddy, which immediately brought him into my close circle of acquaintances. He gave me rides on his shoulders, pushed me on the swing, and played tag with me. Out of all the other little kids there, he chose to play with me, which made me feel special. He made that day at the park fun. It was starting to get dark, and my brothers called out to me that it was time to go home. The stranger compelled me to stay a while longer. I told my brothers to go on without me and that I'd be along in just a few minutes. When I was finally ready to leave, my new adult buddy offered me a ride home in his car. He led me to an alley where he said he had parked. Something didn't feel right, but I went along anyway. Once alone with him in the alley, he manipulated me into the back seat of an abandoned automobile. He didn't get into the front seat, but instead climbed into the back with me where he unzipped his pants and attempted to force his penis into my mouth. I was too frightened to even scream, and for a brief moment, the home where I felt so unloved suddenly became a picture of heaven. I was a small, framed boy alone in the back seat of a car with an adult's weight on me. My mind searched anxiously for a way to escape. As I frantically reasoned that he would soon overpower me in the struggle, I looked down to discover a crowbar on the floor. I believed that God was truly looking over me, despite the troublemaker I seemed to be. With haste, I picked it up and smashed the man in the head with it. While he clutched his head, he moaned in anguish. I scrambled out of the car and ran all the way home. I burst into the house, telling Mama what had happened between my gasps for air. She scolded me verbally for being so friendly. Mama reminded me that she had continuously warned me it would get me into trouble. She asked me questions, and I described the man's physical features to her since I didn't know him personally. I also told her that he was Daddy's friend. She doubted that because she knew all of his acquaintances that lived close by, and this man didn't sound familiar. Mama later told Daddy what had happened. He confirmed that the man had lied. He didn't know him. Mama began asking around the neighborhood based on the description I gave her, but no one knew him. He had disappeared as mysteriously as he appeared at the park that day. Not long after that incident, I saw my perpetrator when my family and I were on our way to visit Aunt Margie, Mama's sister, and her children in the Brewster Projects. He was sitting and talking with someone on the porch of a home we drove by. My memory was very good, so I knew without a doubt it was him. I pointed him out to Mama in a stuttering, tied-tongue frenzy. She instructed the taxi driver to take my siblings and me to Aunt Margie's while she got out of the car to use a nearby payphone to call the authorities. She waited for them to arrive to tell them what the man had done. I was later told that he went to jail, but I was later told that he went to jail, but I was never really sure since I hadn't been asked any questions by an officer or called upon to identify him. Because of this horrible experience, I was the center of attention for a brief moment. I felt like a celebrity with my name up in lights. I retold my thrilling tale numerous times to my siblings, classmates, teachers, and strangers. Mama had hoped such a shocking event would have deterred my gullibility when it came to befriending folks. Not so. Out of harm's way, I was back to my overzealous, careless self when it came to choosing associates. I was hit by a car at the age of 9 as a direct result of my disobedience. It was a warm summer evening in Detroit. Mama had sent us kids to bed around 8 p.m. I wasn't tired and I wasn't craving a soda pop. I decided to sneak out of the house and go to the store. I glided quietly out of a window that led to our backyard where I had hidden empty bottles here and there. I made haste to get home before Mama noticed I wasn't in my bed. Without using caution, I turned and began sprinting back home. Hurriedly crossing the street, I didn't notice a car on the road, and the driver didn't notice me dart in front of him. His automobile struck me hard. The impact slammed me to the ground unconscious. Mama heard the commotion from our house. A neighbor rushed over to tell her it was her son Tommy that had been hit by a car. Mama briefly reasoned that it wasn't possible because she had sent all of her children to bed. Still, she rushed to the scene. Horror struck Mama's heart when she saw me lying in the street, bleeding underneath the car. Her face was the first I focused on in the crowd as I finally came to. I was bewildered. She looked hurt and tears fell from her eyes, but I couldn't quite put two and two together of what was going on. Then I heard her shaky voice. Through sobs, I heard her ask me repeatedly why I had to be so hard-headed. She kept questioning why my heart was so set on disobedience. She was kneeling next to me as I lay there on the ground rubbing my head. At that moment, I finally felt the intensity of her love for me. I hadn't really noticed from day to day that she really did care for me because of all the yelling and confusion that went on in our house. It was a situation such as this for me to feel her love. What had happened was a blur. I thought I was just getting scolded for something again. I wasn't immediately aware I'd been involved in a terrible accident. I didn't even realize I was in pain. The ambulance arrived and I was rushed to the hospital. My face was scarred temporarily and stitches were required on my chin. The most painful part of the ordeal was a compound fracture of my left foot. I had to receive a skin graft from my thigh area to cover a hole in my foot that was chiseled down to the bone. I remained in the hospital for a somewhat lengthy period of time for the surgery and recovery. Uncle Bill was moved with distress when I was hospitalized. He had traveled a long distance just to visit me, which made me feel really special. He seemed to be genuinely concerned about my situation. His tenderness was out of the ordinary to me, especially coming from a man I was accustomed to being rebuked, knocked around, and criticized. I lay in the hospital bed looking up at his kind face. He held my hand and closed his eyes and began to pray for me. I closed my eyes too. He asked God to heal me. His voice was gentle, and I felt something inside me like I'd never felt before. I didn't know what it was, maybe just a good feeling of being cared about. I felt forgiveness for my disobedience as he talked to God. I didn't question if Uncle Bill loved me like I wondered with Daddy. I knew. I wanted my daddy to love me like Uncle Bill did. I still had hope that he would at that age. As I grew older, I knew that would never happen. The physical pain I'd experienced made me regret having made the wrong decision. Mama's tender touches, along with the warm words of those who visited me during my period of recovery, made all of the discomfort worthwhile. The accident, from a spiritual standpoint, was intended to point out my need to take heed to discipline. I ignored its significance, though, just as I did all the other tragedies that pointed to the same subject matter. More than the rules themselves, I disliked the adults that tried to enforce them. Boundaries were designed for my well-being. I refused to listen to those in authority over me because love hurt me. I brushed off correction and would spend the greater part of my life disobeying. Okay, well, it's past midnight, so I will add in another chapter or two this week. This is chapter 4.